You were talking about the World Cup and Iran is here, and we've got protests going on and everything else that's going on with that, Michael. But one of the other things that happens, we hear about this, and I don't know if there's actually an increase in the amount that goes on when there's a major event, or if it's that attention is brought to it when there's a major event. But human trafficking, obviously, as we know, being a coastal city, a large city, and now hosting the World Cup is an issue. So we've invited Professor Stephanie Richard, the director of the Sunita Jain Anti-Trafficking Initiative at Loyola Law School, to talk to us about that. When we talk about trafficking, I keep hearing, whether it's around the Super Bowl or World Cup or the Olympics or whatever else, is there an increase in trafficking, or is it that attention is brought to those locales?
Trafficking is happening at all times in our city, both sex and labor trafficking. But what the evidence-based data shows is that labor trafficking, not sex trafficking, increases around major sporting events. And that's because of the demand for temporary workers in construction, hospitality, security, transportation, and vending. A lot of times you'll hear about increased sex trafficking, and you do see an increase in sex ads, but that does not mean it's sex trafficking, as the majority of those working in commercial sex are there voluntarily.
Well, let's talk a bit about labor trafficking. What does that mean? How is it defined?
Yeah, so labor trafficking is when someone is forced to work against their will through kind of nefarious practices. So we call it force, fraud, and coercion, but it can be anything from threatening a family member to threatening to blacklist someone that they won't be able to work again, to providing housing and threatening to throw them out. So it's different than what labor exploitation is, when we're not paying minimum wage or giving overtimes and breaks, because that employer or subcontractor or business is threatening that worker.
So in many cases, it sounds like there may be blackmail going on too. So if somebody's here, for instance, without documentation, then they say, well, you have to work for me or else. I mean, is that kind of the threat?
That would be the type of coercion that we see in trafficking cases.
Is the city doing anything about this? Again, because we've got an increase in the need for laborers. FIFA is in town. FIFA saying anything about this? Does the city have a policy when it comes to this sort of thing?
Yeah, thanks for asking about this, because in 2017, FIFA adopted this human rights policy that said it would look at preventing the documented human rights abuses, including human trafficking, that have been well documented globally for all of its games. And yet it has not fulfilled this promise. And that's why I wanted to come and talk to you guys today. So Los Angeles, even though the World Cup has begun, has not issued its required human rights plan under FIFA's policy. And what I think is most egregious is that FIFA, who is saying they have a human rights commitment, has offered $0 to supporting any of the 11 U.S. host cities and actually fulfilling its human rights commitments, including preventing human trafficking.
Our guest is Professor Stephanie Richard, director of the Sunita Jain Anti-Trafficking Initiative at Loyola Law School. Stephanie, what teeth is there in the FIFA agreement? I mean, is there any enforcement mechanism, any obligation that they follow through on what they said they would?
Well, FIFA got a lot of good publicity by saying it was committed to human rights, and unfortunately, there isn't much to do. FIFA was required to present a human rights plan to the city of Los Angeles by December of 31st of 2025. They didn't do that. They met with experts like myself once, and basically a website went up with local hotline numbers. And that was the same as what we saw across the country. So we've been tracking all the human rights reports. And as of June 5th, so 5 days before the World Cup began, only 7 of the 11 host cities did not have human rights plans that were finalized. And then in the last 3 days, 3 more jumped in. So we've got 4 cities, including Los Angeles, without human rights plans at all. And then 7 that are very basic and have really no concrete objectives, no way to hold anyone accountable, no evaluation, and most notably, 0 funding from a $1 billion industry where there's documented evidence that they harm people globally.
So that was my next question, and you're kind of hinting at it, is what is entailed in a plan? When we want a comprehensive plan, you say obviously the website with a hotline number is not enough. You want actionable items. What do those items look like?
Okay, so we came out with a report from the Sunita Jain Anti-Trafficking Initiative in December of 2025 to provide this exact kind of guidance. And what it first asked for was $3 million in funding commitments from FIFA to fulfill certain worker protections and obligations to prevent human trafficking. What does that mean? It means that we need to increase resources for our local hotline, who will have to respond to more calls. We need to evaluate and have independent audits of all our contracts that are used in procurement for city work around our contracting events. We need to have increased immigrant protections around the increased security we see around the games, and we need to have legal monitoring around that. We need to have innovation funds well in advance of the game so that local groups can really think about, how do I prevent trafficking in my unhoused population, in my sex worker population, in my immigrant population, and actually launch these initiatives well before the games begin. None of that happened.
How can people identify this? I know that we talk about sex trafficking. Maybe labor trafficking is a new term for folks. We certainly see prostitution in certain parts of the city. We don't know if it's always trafficking, but we know that those corridors are also suspected of being corridors of sex trafficking. What does it look like? What does sex trafficking and labor trafficking look like to the average guy?
So what I always tell people is, if you know your local community and something doesn't look right, ask. Right? So many of the clients I've served over the years will tell me, I stayed in my labor or sex trafficking situation for 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, because no one ever asked me if I needed help. Now, again, you can put someone at risk by being overzealous in reporting human trafficking and or doing too much outreach. What I tell the local public is ask someone if they need help, and also keep a copy of the National Human Trafficking Hotline in their cell phone. So if someone says yes and explains something that might sound like trafficking, instead of calling, if they don't want you to call 911, which can be really scary for a vulnerable population, you can give them a hotline number to call.
Stephanie Richard, professor and director of Sunita Jain Anti-Trafficking Initiative, Loyola Law School. What do you run into as far as explanations when you say, how come there hasn't been a plan developed? Is this concerns over commerce? Is this concerns over funding? Because if you were to ask anyone, do you want to stop trafficking? Well, of course we want to stop trafficking. What? I mean, that's very Epstein. Nobody's pro-Epstein. But then you say, well, it could cost you $3 million. And they go, well, that's $3 million, though. And all of a sudden, that dedication seems to go, well, wait a minute here. Hold on, let's pump the brakes. Maybe we don't want to spend $3 million. What's the explanation?
Yeah. So what I always tell people is there's no easy way to prevent human trafficking. Otherwise, we would have done it by now, right?
Sure.
But that's why we need individual evidence-based practices that really look at, how do we prevent trafficking before it starts from a public health perspective. And so we're only going to do that by really nuanced work. And one of those areas is major sporting events, because we have the evidence-based data that shows that labor trafficking increases. So what I know around sporting events, which is what we're talking about today, is that the Los Angeles Sports and Entertainment Commission negotiates all the contracts for these major sporting events. So they negotiated the FIFA contract. They negotiated the Super Bowl contract that's coming. And so they are the ones with the ultimate power to put provisions in the contracts with these major billion-dollar corporations and ensure that our city has protections for human rights and that it's funded. And so if you're a listener, what you can do is ask our Los Angeles Sports and Entertainment Commission, why aren't we valuing our most vulnerable communities and protecting them in our negotiations? LA is a powerful city, and we should be able to do that. And we should be able to do it before the 2027 Super Bowl, because it's too late now with the FIFA World Cup.
Professor Stephanie Richard, director of the Sunita Jain Anti-Trafficking Initiative at Loyola Law School. Professor, thanks so much for coming down. I'm sure we'll have calls to talk again, maybe before the Super Bowl, definitely before the Olympic Games.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.